My name is Jeremy Baver. I'm the Executive Director of Hartford 2000. Happy New Year to anybody who I missed out there. This is our new community space at 79 Van Block. We've been here for almost a year, thanks to the hospitality of Sheldon Charter Oak. Sheldon Oak Central, I'm sorry, and Emily Wolf, their Executive Director. We are a nonprofit organization. It's our mission to be a collective voice of Hartford's residents and stakeholders working together to strengthen, to grow our community. We're glad that everybody is here tonight to share in this panel discussion about community economic development, a very important topic and subject that is near and dear to the heart of our Chair Emeritus, Bernadine Silvers. I'd like to thank just a couple of people before I begin tonight. Everybody on our board, all the volunteers, our two board co-chairs, Gwangi Magabani, Marion Griffin, who have worked tirelessly to put this together. It came together very quickly in the last couple of weeks. That was just supposed to be a normal monthly board meeting, but it's turned into something a lot more important, a lot more special, as you guys will see. So thank you to Hartford Public Access Television, Gil Martinez, who came on short notice and is going to be able to broadcast this for us. And thank you all for coming. Let's have a great panel discussion. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Marion Griffin, co-chair of Hartford 2000, and she will introduce our guests and panel. Thank you very much.
I'd like you to understand is the reason that we are here today is because I was at a March meeting in December, and I happened to have a conversation with Glendon. And we were talking, and she said, well, I'd like to come and talk about economic development. I said, wow, it fits right in with our initiatives, because if you look at the newsletter that is on the table, if you don't have one, you'll look at the very top of the back page, and it says that the framework for our future is the advocacy and community economic development. So it fell together, and then David Griggs, Metro Hartford Alliance, it was perfect for him to be here, and Erik, the new Director of Development Services for the City of Hartford, makes perfect sense for him to be here. So I don't want to delay any further, but I think you know, if you don't know everyone, Emily is going to be doing the moderating, and we want to get started. And we are going, if you look at the agenda, we are going to keep this quite short in the sense that we will finish at 7:10. If you want to stay and talk, you can until 7:30. You know, there's an opportunity to share information or whatever. And we do welcome your input. If you notice, you'll have an evaluation sheet, a card with your packet of information. Please complete that at the end of the session. Also, there's a blank card. You can use that to write your questions, and if you could pass those in, and then Emily can ask the question, or if you want, you can raise your hand and she will call on you at a certain point in time. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Emily, and I have had the fortune of working with Emily on the Hartford 2000 board for, was it almost a year now? And it's been quite a pleasure. But I was surprised because I don't know much about economic development. I don't know much about developing properties and doing the things that Emily does. But she is director of Sheldon Oak, which is a Hartford-based nonprofit housing development corporation. And in that tenure, her tenure there, she has actually overseen revitalization of a number of properties, including Upper Albany, and is it 4 to 40 Vine Street? Yes, it's a fabulous place. And then Sheldon Charter Oak and Northeast neighborhoods. So, Emily, you're on.
I have questions that the Hartford 2000 board developed, but I think this will really be more of a conversation than a Q&A. But before we start, I just wanted to set the place so you all recognize and feel the energy of this building, because it is a good example of community economic development that happened when neighborhood residents decided to demand more and worked with the NRZ, thank you, SysCon, and the leader at the time, Bernadine Silvers, to bring resources and create collaborations and bring in the financing to redo this development, which at the time in 1999 was sort of blighted, semi-abandoned, very scary. And now, with that as the beginning, the entire neighborhood is really transformed. Sheldon Oak did 200 units in this neighborhood as a start, but then other investors came in and other people saw the value of the neighborhood. And now, if you weren't around 20 years ago, it's hard for you to imagine, but the idea of people saying, well, live in this neighborhood and walk to work downtown was really not something that people thought. There was a stable community, but it wasn't the kind of community that people marketed proudly, and now it really is. So we started small, and now here we are. And it's been 20 years, and this property is now ready for development again. So we're going to create something even more beautiful. You have the bios of the panel. I'm not going to repeat what's in the bios, and you all probably know each other, but I do just want to say that, introduce people briefly. Glendon Thames is the president of the Hartford City Council, and she serves on many boards in the community. She's a Hartford native and living in Blue Hills. And as the executive director of CT Next, in her professional capacity, she works with innovative early stage companies, providing guidance for growth and cultivating a robust, innovative ecosystem across the state. David Griggs is the president and CEO of the Metro Hartford Alliance, the region's business and economic development organization that drives prosperity, job creation, job retention, and promotes Greater Hartford as a place for people to come and invest. He previously worked in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the city of Buffalo, which I think is interestingly analogous to Hartford. It's also like Hartford, a legacy city that's declined in population and gone through industrialization, but then found new ways of creating new investment. And then Erik Johnson is Hartford's new development director, director of development services. And I just want to point out that that's the department that provides all the services related to community economic development, job growth, urban planning, housing, code enforcement, zoning, blight remediation, culture, special events. So, in other words, pretty much everything.
It's a super department.
That's Public Works, because it's snowing from it.
Oh, yeah.
So that's Public Works.
So before at Hartford, he was in various leadership positions in community economic development and housing in New Haven and public-private partnerships in Baltimore, Philadelphia, D.C., and California. I am going to start by focusing on the definition of community economic development that the board has established, just for conversation's sake. And it is the coordinated, comprehensive, collaborative process to plan and implement development aimed at generating wealth, employment, and capacity in a sustainable community. It's also known as asset-based development, which sees our neighborhoods as assets to build upon and not problems to solve. And it's also community wealth development. These are all different ways of describing it, but what they have in common is focus on community strength, collaborations between stakeholders, residents, institutions, and government, the very important issues of equity and inclusiveness, broadening the base of wealth and ownership, encouraging investment in the neighborhood, and discouraging leakage from the neighborhood. So people who live in the neighborhoods are paid, and people don't have to leave the neighborhoods to spend their money, and very importantly, benefiting people who already live here as much as the people that we're trying to attract to come and live here. So I'm going to ask you to share your own perspective about community economic development based on that definition. And I'll start with David. Would you like to add or refine to that add to or refine that definition? And what are the most important strategies for ensuring that all the community benefits from development and growth?
Well, I think you, in lots of ways you said, and Glendowlyn certainly in her bio, it's collaborations. It's so everything we do needs to be in collaboration and partnership with somebody else. There's nothing that the Metro Hartford Alliance can do by itself. We are a piece of a community, and the things that we do fill a void within our economic delivery process. So community development and economic development, there's often a lot of discussion. Is there a difference between the two? And there are some subtle differences between the two, but at the end of the day, it is about people. You know, it be it economic development or community development, at the end of the day, it's about people and it's about a job. And the best way to change the lives of people is with a job. So regardless of what we call it, at the end of the day, the focus is the same, to me.
Mhm.
And so just to piggyback off of what you stated, Emily, and kind of setting the table for the definition and what David expressed, for me on how I look at community economic development is very much in line with, you know, people and their environment and what quality of place, if you will, provides that empowerment to progress and wealth, educational, social, emotional, all those things. And I think, you know, it used to be the case where people looked at economic development as just a siloed thing, a real estate play, physical development, if you will. And now we've moved, the paradigm, I guess, has moved to more looking at it comprehensively from an asset-based perspective and also holistically, because economic development is housing. It is education, because you have to develop the workforce to be able to participate productively in the workforce and provide assets for companies who are looking for talent. It is transportation, it's infrastructure. And so the communities that have really invested in their infrastructure, because people need to access markets, right? You need to be able to expand your economy for people to go in and out and access jobs that may not be close to where they are, what have you. And communities that have been able to do that, right, are prospering. And I think, you know, a challenge, right, I know we're going to get into this, but a challenge that Hartford faces in that regard is that we haven't necessarily put that level of investment in infrastructure. So we're kind of trying to play catch up, and it's a sprint game because there's so many cities across the nation that are really reaping from the benefit of urban migration. And so we have to move at a faster pace, and a lot is in motion. We have a lot of momentum, so it's a very exciting time for Hartford. But for me, that encapsulates the definition of community economic development.
What do you think are the strategies for the city and for, you know, agencies that are involved with entrepreneur growth and small business to create jobs with well-paid jobs, livable wage jobs, and make sure that people in Hartford are connected to those jobs?
Yeah, I mean, first you have to be able to invest in training. So I think right now what we're seeing in large, not only in Hartford but across the state, is a skills mismatch, right? So we're in like the fourth industrial revolution, and it's all about the digital, you know, economy, and it's moving very fast. And so we're not preparing our workforce for those jobs. So the UTCs of the world, the insurance, you know, companies that are here, they need that level of talent, and we don't necessarily have a pool of talent because we haven't necessarily developed. So it's going to require transformational impact and really investing in a skill up programs to ensure that Hartford residents have opportunities to engage in this new economy.
Now the advanced manufacturing folks want to compete for the kids that are going to college too. So now you have this divergent path where now you used to be able to be the okay student who didn't want to go to college and you had a place to go, right? Now college, we use UTC just as an example, or their subsidiary, whatever manufacturer, they want the college kids. They want to tap into the kids that are going to college to fill their roles. So now there's also competition at the top, right? So unfortunately, what this means is for everybody and how we process education, what used to be okay here now has to be up here because everybody's competing for the same person, and you can't be the okay student and think that you can walk into an applied manufacturing job anymore because the skill level for those workers is going up. So what ends up happening is we're creating talent, but that talent now goes to high school when the companies are saying, well, come here too, right? So everybody's now competing for this really small subset of student. And then unfortunately, when you look at the disparities between kids of color versus non-kids of color, we're disproportionately now pushed out of two places, colleges and the workforce, because we have that skill gap. But it is the same,
Right.
But they're competing for the same people.
But you're also seeing a shift too, where I think this is an opportunity because the reality is all our kids are not going to college. Like that is just the reality. So if we think that's the case, like we need to just kind of like stop. And I think that's been a part of our problem is because we put the pressure to say you must go to college, and not preparing them for a workforce and a career. And so there's opportunities to take that student that has good math skills, has good science skills, and train them up in a very short boot camp style, certification program that they can go to the manufacturer, they can go to the IT firm, that they don't necessarily need a 4-year degree. So it's those type of programs that we need to invest in to skill up our residents, if you will.
So David, is the Metro Hartford Alliance working on any plans to collaborate with, local higher education and employers?
Sure. So on our board, we have pretty much all of our major universities there. So there's already a relationship that exists. But the opportunity that we have isn't to connect us to the higher education, but to connect our employers to higher education. When you look at where our companies have to go to recruit talent, the fact that they have to go outside of the state of Connecticut to find an aerospace engineer because our Connecticut universities don't offer a degree in aerospace engineering, to me creates an opportunity. It creates an opportunity for the Alliance to pull our manufacturers or our other professional services companies together and say, all right, how do we develop that talent? What are the curriculum that you need? And have those conversations. It's about the collaboration. And I would further say that this issue around talent is not unique to Connecticut. It's not unique to Hartford. This is an issue that nearly every region in the U.S. is facing. You can go outside of the U.S. and there are lots of regions around the world that are facing this same issue. So we needn't feel that this is a problem that we have. This is a situation that all of America is grappling with. How do we do this? So in some regard, the region that comes up with a good answer stands a better chance to win. And that's what the collaborations are about. That's what the conversations have to be about how do we as a region compete against other regions to answer these questions. And I think conversations like this are great. I think we also have a very unique subset of companies, white collar and blue collar, that sets us apart. We've got globally leading industries, truly globally leading industries here in our region. in both the manufacturing sector and the professional services sector. Those companies can help lead this conversation because they're employing thousands, literally thousands of our residents. So how do we get that next 100? What do we need to do, to your point, on the education piece? You know, what is it that they're looking for? They know. They need to tell us so that we can begin to institute some of those that teaching. You know, because everything is going digital. If you haven't heard of Industry 4.0, you will. It is that the connection between tech and manufacturing that is just going to be the future of how things are made.
Well, how do we approach the problem earlier, you know, for younger children and make sure that they aren't closed out when they're still in elementary school?
And I don't mean to jump right in on this one, but I think one of the things we need to do as parents, because you both have said, look, not every kid is going to go to college, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. But what we need to do is change our own perceptions as parents about what manufacturing is. You know, you mentioned I spent a lot of time in Buffalo, New York, a real blue collar manufacturing town, and the perception of manufacturing is old factories, broken windows, dirty, dangerous, and that is so not what manufacturing is today. It is as high tech and clean and high paying as it comes, and as parents we need to open our minds to the fact that our children may have a future in that, and that's okay.
I just want to pivot a little to another facet of economic development, which is small business. When I first met Erik the first day, we drove up Albany Avenue, and he was focusing on the fact that it was a retail corridor, and talking about how important it is to not to think small, but to think about it as a corridor with nodes that are like destinations, and then use multiplier effects to build out from some sort of center. And Hartford has a lot of corridors. There's, you know, Albany Avenue and Park Street, Main Street, Farmington Avenue, the southern, you know, Maple and Weathersfield and Franklin. And my question to Erik was, how do you look at these retail corridors and their relationship to the larger projects that are happening in Hartford? It's part of making neighborhoods livable to have goods and services available in the neighborhoods. And how is that related to the big investments that are coming in?
It's almost, if not more, on some levels. I mean, like, so everybody knows a city's downtown, right? You know, everybody knows Manhattan, but you know, cities ultimately, once you get past their downtown, they're defined by their neighborhoods, right? Where do I want to live, right? What's it close to? What can I do to walk there? You know, do I feel safe? Can I get something that I need? How walkable is it? You know, these are increasingly, quality of life issues that people make, decisions based on, right? It used to be how close was I to school if I had kids, and how far was it to work, right? Those used to be the defining things, and then people, the world got younger and smarter and more proximate, and people said, you know what, I don't really want to spend half my time in my car. So now the neighborhood, retail, cultural, interesting things are really more important because they're the source of jobs and vitality and culture for neighborhoods, right? That's how you define it, right? Whether it's, this is the West Indian part of town where I can get the best beef patty, or this is the Puerto Rican part of town where I can get the best mofongo. People know that, right? And then people want to be close to that. So I think it's vitally important in terms of defining the character of your larger communities Because if you don't have healthy communities or healthy neighborhoods, you will not have a healthy city. So I think that's, and then we can't devalue that. That's also where a lot of people work, right? Where a lot of people work, a lot of people can have access to, because not everybody has access to get to the Clinton outlets or to the malls or other things. So I think having a strong retail sector or neighborhood sector is really valuable for any city, because although everybody defines it by the cool buildings that are downtown, it's not always where the majority of people live. And if where the people live makes sense and has services and amenities, they'll not just be attractive and helpful to the people who live there, they're also the attractors. And here's an example of that that's happening in Hartford right now. Like Coltsville, right? Which has no services, if you really, and I know we're here, there's not like a cool, it just got Hooker Brewery and some stuff, but it's not like you can go buy like groceries and a bagel in other places, but it's a cool place. The Colt building has become a cool place to live and is now part of a defining part of this neighborhood, right? If you have defining things that are interesting in the neighborhood, ultimately your city will be viable, because that's ultimately where people want to be. So I'm a big believer that as much as downtown is important, the neighborhoods are the soul of every city. If you have healthy neighborhoods, you're going to have a vibrant community.
And what kind of strategies does the city have for marketing neighborhoods and their distinctive characteristics and what's appealing about each one?
Well, admittedly, I would say that we're building that. And I would say, this is not a Hartford issue. This is a Connecticut cities issue. I think we do a horrible job of marketing and talking about what our collective strengths versus and instead focus on our weaknesses. We're clearly talking about what we don't have, but we never talk about the things that we do. So I think part of someone once told me that the measure of any town is what the taxi drivers say about you when you pull in. Right. So I guess now it's what the Uber drivers say or Lyft, right? So, the question is, when we get our Uber and Lyft drivers to say, well, you should really go to Scott's Bakery or someplace else, that's when you start to know that you've moved the needle on it. So the, Yelp reviews for all the new people in the audience, right? They move the needle on some level, but it's really about what people say are the interesting places to go, right? Because the cool restaurant that's downtown will get play, right? Everybody will know where it is, but it's, how do you figure out where that cool Brazilian spot is, that's off of Maple Street? That's what defines you, right? So part of it is, if the community doesn't believe it's cool and interesting, nobody else will. So, the marketing strategy actually starts in the neighborhood and then works out.
And I'll just piggyback on that, because I think that's a huge area where we can have do a lot more, and we just haven't had the capacity to do it. And I know we've had conversations with Metro Hartford Alliance, and again, collaborating more and kind of them being an extension and helping the city build our capacity, because our capacity is limited, right? And so we're happy to have Erik on board now to really build out that vision. And then, how do we sell ourselves? What are we? And how do we express that and tell our story of all of our neighborhoods, because they're so unique. They have so many assets, and I don't think we do a good job internally of understanding our aptitude of our assets, and really looking at economic and community development from that perspective. Like, where are we strong? Where can we double and triple down on? We have the gaps, we have the challenges, and we have to deal with those. But where are we strong, and where can we really place some high bets on? And we have a lot of those, and we have to be able to tell that story, because a lot of it, I'll tell you, traveling a lot through my professional capacity and going to different cities that have kind of, been on the map and have buzzed about a comeback city, and they have a hot tech scene and, cool and sexy and all that stuff. You go to these places and you say, like, wow, there's been a revitalization, but it hasn't captured the neighborhood, right? There's still, you go to those cities and they're like, yo, don't want to go over there, you don't want to go over there, and so, but they've been able to tell their story and market in a way that stuff, you don't really know about that stuff, and we just don't do a good job as a state, and definitely not as a city, at selling ourselves and promoting ourselves, because honestly, that's half the battle. If you can beat your own drum and really express your assets and what makes you great and what makes you different and unique, you're winning. And if you're not doing that, you're behind. And I think that's an area where we need to make more investments in, and we have some momentum to do that.
Well, nothing replaces marketing, good marketing, planning, investments, but I think listening to this, it sounds like this thinking about our neighborhood assets and how to communicate them is something that the NRZs would be really expert at, and is a opportunity for collaboration.
I just want to add something to tie kind of part of this conversation to the definition of community economic development that you talked about. There are two things that I'm not sure I heard, but one is the idea of facilitate, right? Like the three of us, and we have policy in the middle, are facilitators, right? So we're actually not always doers. We're really facilitators. And the other thing is change, right? The intent of doing some type of community economic development activity is that there's change that comes on the other side of it, right? So if there's not an expectations or a tolerance of change, right, then ultimately there's nothing to facilitate, right? So I think part of what ends up happening is we want the development, but we don't want the change, right? So what you end up in is a circle where I've done a lot of thinking about development and a lot of attempt at facilitation, but what you never get to is change, right? So I think it's important that in my definition of community economic development, the end result is I'm doing this stuff to an outcome that will result in some type of change that we hope is defined, right? But I just wanted to make the end that it's facilitating, which is like it's all of our tasks to move the ball, and then at the end of the day, there is some change aspects that comes to it because I'm not developing anything to get status quo.
At the city level, I mean, it is our role to what Erik said, facilitate, to provide the environment, incentives when necessary, and catalytic, investments in public intervention when necessary to drive, the bottom-up approach, if you will, because growth happens organically, and we don't have all the good ideas. And if any of us say we do, then you should not trust them because we don't. Because again, growth happens from the bottom up, but we set the policy, we set the environment, we convene, we facilitate, we can provide some catalytic funding again to make that happen. But for long-term sustainability, it really comes from the community and the stakeholders that are invested and bought into that process early on. And I think we have to do a better job at understanding what are the resources and capacity that our small business community needs, our residents need, so that they can help self-build the community that they want to see and the change that they want to see in their community.
I think a major part of our definition of community economic development was collaboration and definitely involvement of the residents, the grassroots, people who really know the community. But I wanted to ask David along those lines about the Metro Hartford Alliance's neighborhood development initiative. How is it partnering with Hartford and the neighborhood to ensure equitable growth and enhance quality of life in the neighborhood?
In that time, I've spent a lot of time listening, getting out into the community and our region to hear what people say, to get feedback on how the Alliance has interacted with different levels, different people, different neighborhoods, different cities, different towns. And one thing that I found was that the Hartford Chamber of Commerce sits underneath the Alliance, and it has since the Regional Growth Council and the Chamber were pulled together back in 1999. what we ended up with over time was more of a regional chamber of commerce. And in the process of doing that, we may have lost our way a bit with the businesses that make up the neighborhoods in the city of Hartford. And, you know, that is the purview of the Hartford Chamber of Commerce. And that became evident as soon as I got into the neighborhood associations and the retail zones. So what we've done is taken a look at how we operate, and one thing that we didn't have was an executive director for the Hartford Chamber of Commerce. So starting this year, we'll have an executive director for the Hartford Chamber of Commerce, Julio Concepcion, who the community probably knows well. He will be our executive director. You'll be seeing him on the streets, meeting with the companies, trying to understand door to door, what do we need? How can we help make our neighborhoods to the point of more retail? What is it that we need? What is it that the appropriate role for the Hartford Chamber of Commerce will be moving forward to help participate in the solutions?
I wanted also for you to talk a little bit about regionalization as opposed to the Hartford city, and how the Metro Hartford Alliance sees economic development in the city in relation to their work regionally.
So again, there was a Regional Growth Council and the Hartford Chamber of Commerce. On the Regional Growth Council side, or the Regional Economic Development Organization, we will be much more aggressive in getting out to tell the Hartford story. What we need to do is first figure out who are we. We think we know who we are. We're insurance, we're aerospace, we're advanced manufacturing, but just knowing that's not enough. You know, we have to know who do we compete against, and how do we outcompete those regions that, you know, if there's a company that's looking to place a new manufacturing facility or a new back office operation, we need to know why we're able to compete for those jobs, why those jobs should come here and not to a competing region, and then very aggressively try to win that project. The part where we, as the Alliance, may have been less aggressive is in that really outward marketing of our region as a place to do business. And I can tell you, I've been in this profession for a while, and I've never seen Hartford out at these shows. And, you know, Hartford was never a community that I had even considered competing against, because you weren't on the list. Right? You don't have to compete against somebody who's not even on the list. So it's the Alliance's job to get us on the list, you know, to get us competing, and we're going to lose some, but that's okay. If we're in the fight, we're in the fight. We'll win some. We'll learn. You know, specifically, where should we focus our efforts? What are our assets? And it's got to be regional. It has to be regional. Because if we're talking to a company out of California, they're going to look at our region. They're going to look big picture first. They're not going to get down to an address until we've proven that we can provide the workforce, we could provide the supply base, we could provide the conduits for them to sell their product. Until we can prove all that, they're not going to worry about whether or not they're going to locate in Hartford or Glastonbury or any place. We have to compete as a region to get into a project before we can worry about an address. So this is just the way it is. And they will compare us to other regions. site selectors are folks who work with companies to try to find them at their next location. Those site selectors have to look sometimes globally. So they're looking at a database that will list out our region compared to another region. And they use MSAs, Metropolitan Statistical Areas, it's federal government designation. So we have to use our MSA data so that we can compare apples to apples against Raleigh or against Albany or against whoever, Milwaukee, whoever we're competing against for these jobs. So we do take a regional approach because that's the way they're looking at us. So we have to talk to them in their language.
I've got a few questions. Is that one too?
I think it's
It's
just
my
a
question.
If there's a trend, okay. Thank you, I see the word on it. This is a difficult question, and I'm not sure who wants to entertain this, but it's, there are a couple of questions with this theme, and it's about the marketing, and it's what can you do to get local media outlets to help with marketing and stop treating Hartford like a crime capital?
Yeah, that is the big nut to crack, and the $1 million question that we have been dealing with since I was a little girl, decades. And I think in this age, because of social media and social outlets and our digital capability, that there's still a factor, but I think you actually can do a workaround and get your story out there ahead of them if you have the internal infrastructure and capacity to do that. There's so many ways that you can preempt what they say through your own storytelling. And I think I said this earlier, we don't have that capacity and infrastructure. We kind of not had the investments in there that we need to actually ramp that up. And again, I think Metro Hartford would be a strong collaborator and partner in that effort in capturing the region and the city of Hartford as like the center city, if you will, and helping us really uplift that message. Because they are who they are. They got to sell newspapers. They're dealing with their own disruption in the digital age. And so they have to, have the catchy phrase articles that gets people's attention, gets people, ramped up, what have you. But I do think that there's the workaround and the opportunity for us to be able to preempt that. And we just have to develop the strategy and tactics to do it. But it's doable. Communities do it all over. Businesses do it all over.
I would add that this is you're absolutely correct. The Metro Hartford Alliance should be a partner with you on this. I received a call from Realtor.com last week. They had done their own analysis to look at cities that had affordable housing and low crime. And Hartford was number 6 on the list.
Can you say that again?
The region.
Can you say that again?
The region.
Right. The Hartford MSA was the number 6 on the list of affordable housing with low crime.
Yep.
So, you probably didn't see that on the front page of the press. So we took that a step further and said, all right, well, of those other communities, let's look at affordability and by looking at our average wage. And our average wage in the Hartford region was $10,000 more than the next community. So, so here becomes another way for us to start to tell our story. And it's about the good that we collectively are. So part of the role for the Alliance is to tell you, because everybody here has a network, be it through Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever it is, but we have to give you that ammunition, because if we're only fed bad news, It's the only thing we know. So when somebody asks, you know, if the Uber driver is only getting the bad news, what's he gonna communicate to the person who gets in the back seat? So we have to be able to communicate these good things, because and I'm telling you, not a week goes by that I'm not called by somebody who's ranked as high. Our women entrepreneurs, I think we're number 6 in the nation for women entrepreneurs. Well, that's not so bad either. You know, when you start to look at these, and this is not data that we're pulling, and that makes it even more important. These are other folks who are looking nationwide and highlighting us. So why shouldn't we stand up and talk about it?
But David, I think that also brings up an interesting point. When the people outside of your community know more about your community than you do, right? Then you are at yourself at a disadvantage, right? So part of that is we should know, right? But it also means that people are watching us, right? You know, so it's like this. You know, if you're fatalistic, then bad things will happen. If you're optimistic, better things will happen, right? And if you work hard and you're optimistic, great things happen, right? So we got to decide which one we're going to be. That's part of it. But my takeaway when I heard that, I heard some of those is, you know, there's a lot of people looking in and around Hartford as a market for whatever reasons, right? You got a bunch of companies that have big logos that have corporate brands on them, right? Generally speaking, there's a high quality of life in the market. Other places to the north and south are infinitely more expensive than we are, right? So we have a bunch of natural advantages, but again, if we don't believe them because we actually believe the stuff that we hear from The Current or on CBS or Channel 3, right, then we're falling into the already Connecticut perversive narrative that we're not good enough, right? And we are. Like I said, it's a fundamentally more diverse, more energized, more dynamic place than we give ourselves credit for, right? And this is coming from a guy who used to live or kind of lives in New Haven. So for me,
moving to Hartford.
so for me to say that is hard, right? Because we think we're special down there.
Yes, you do.
We think we're special down
They're
there.
real special.
We think we're special down there. But you know, from a, you know, as David said, from an economy standpoint, it's a more dynamic economy here, right? This is the state capital. You're surrounded by more affluence. There's a rich history. I can't say richer yet, Mayor, but it's a rich history. And you know, those things have to be celebrated. And again, they have to be celebrated in the context there are certain things that we're going to have to change in how we look and how we define ourselves in order for ultimately for us to achieve the things we want to achieve. But we can compete with a lot of places, right? It's just that you got to believe you compete. I always, you know, my last kind of storyline, punchline statement is, I know that there's New York and Boston, right? But no one ever says that they want to live in New York State or Massachusetts, right? It's like, I want to live in Manhattan. Well, most people can't afford to live in Manhattan, right? But I can live in Hartford and have almost, you know, kind of the same apartment, maybe a bigger house, right? Some cool places to go, and, you know, entertainment and be closer and access to my family. And so we have all these competitive advantages in jobs that will pay me comparatively what I would have gotten in Manhattan. So we just don't have to talk that way. And then the change will come.
That's right. But also to that point, I think there's a lot of learnings from other communities because it's not so much about attracting new, and we have to attract new talent, we have to attract new businesses, but there's a balance to that, and we have to make sure that we're rising all boats at the same time, right? And so the people that have been here, live here, have built small businesses here, how do we help them build their capacity and understand their needs so they can reinvest if they want to reinvest in their businesses, in their communities, again, to rise all boats. So it's a delicate balance. We have to focus on that retention but also we have to attract new because we have to grow. At Hartford's prime, we were about at 175,000 people. We're at about 124. So there's room to create more density and really be that urban fabric. And so again, there's a lot of opportunity, but again, we have to make sure we're balancing that with the needs of the neighborhoods and the residents that are here, as well as bringing new in.
Thank you, because the running theme and all the rest of the questions is how do we, or how do you plan to help make sure that the neighborhoods benefit from this exciting growth that is happening? Specifically, how will each organization assist the neighborhoods in growing and accessing the opportunities? Will you meet us where we are and help provide training to help us to become eligible for the job?
I think there's a lot of that, right? I talked about earlier the current skills mismatch. And you know, Hartford has a high unemployment rate, particularly in our neighborhoods. And there's a lot of jobs available and people talk about them, but our residents to some extent don't have the skills. And so we have to reinvest in those skill up type of programs. And again, our entrepreneurs and kind of lifestyle, food-based companies, how can we help them if they have a vision and want to be an entrepreneur? How can we help mentor and train them and provide access to those resources to help them empower themselves? And we have to talk to the community more honestly, and just understanding what their needs are. What does that look like for them? Again, from a housing perspective, from a small business perspective, we have to look at it holistically, because that's really what makes a thriving and sustainable, vibrant, and economically diverse community. Because that is a challenge that we have in the city. And you know, part of revitalizing a city, you get a lot of new investment, a lot of new people, but we have to make sure that we are providing those opportunities for people that are there, and not creating more of the same and pushing people out into particular neighborhoods, but we're spreading and looking at it very strategically, because we do have some neighborhoods that have, you know, high affordable housing and not affordable housing, and the definition of, you know, depending on who you talk to, everybody has a different interpretation of what affordable housing means, but subsidized, Section 8 based, you know, affordable housing, we have a lot of that concentrated in some areas of the city, which is not healthy. And so we have to, again, think about how do we balance that out, and really move that around the city to create more economically diverse cities.
I mean, so you have two scenarios. You have the suburban kids have the exposure, the parents come home, talk about business, and you have kids that go to school, get masters and masters and masters, and they can't find a job. And then on the other end, you have the youth kids that are not exposed to a lot of things. So I think that there's a model there. You look at the NCAA, the NBA, if your kid is 6, 7, he's 14 years old, somebody's gonna knock on your door that he wants to be an athlete. So we need the schools, the companies like UTC, Black and Decker and all those, and the travelers, they need to go into schools when the kids are 14, 15. It's all about exposure. The Hartford Insurance used to have the STAG program. Many years ago, I don't believe they have it. They used to go into Hartford High, that's where I went, and they used to take kids when they were 15 years old, bring them to the Hartford. My wife is an example of one that she worked there for 33 years. So we need, this is there. Why did NCAA goes and start recruiting kids at 14 and 15? They even make it because they want to win. So we want to win, so companies need to want to win. So they want to win, it's all about exposure. If a kid doesn't see a future, if they're 14 and 15 and they're going to school, they don't see a path, if they don't see them working in their manufacturing job, they're not going to see it. You have to see it. And without that exposure, they're not gonna get there. So I think it's all, the models are there, it's who wants to win, and our companies need to want to win. And they're not tapping these kids. These kids need to see a future. They need to see, yeah, I could do that job. Or, an example, in my case, my father worked in a foundry, probably the worst jobs you could ever get. I saw that, I said, I ain't doing that. You know, so that was the other side. I exposed to a job I didn't want to do. So I better do something else. So I think just, you know, this is something that has to happen from companies to schools. These kids can't be sitting in a class and not be exposed to what they could see them doing in the future. That's all.
Well, one last question from the audience and the board was, how do you, any one of you or all of you, see Hartford 2000 and the NRZs working with you and other institutions to ensure healthy and broad-based development?
First and foremost, I just want to say thank you to the NRZs and Hartford 2000. Having worked in the city having been raised in the city and worked in the city for quite some time and worked intimately with the NRZs over the time, I truly appreciate the value that you contribute to the overall revitalization of the city, and being that checks and balance to some extent, and being that community voice, being that persistence arm advocate for your communities. That is so important. And so I thank you all for that. And I think if you looked back a decade, right? Because I think a lot of times we get caught up in the day-to-day, and we get caught up in kind of the quick wins, and we want to see stuff move now, and change doesn't happen like that. And if we reflect and look 10 years ago, you know, when you all did your strategic plans, and we did the plan, One City, One Plan, and we talked about, you know, what we wanted to see for each NRZ, what development opportunities were, you're going to see some, you know, significant, substantial change. And I think that's a critical role that the NRZs play into contributing to that overall economic development strategy. So now we're coming upon that 10-year mark where we have to now engage in a new exercise around One City, One Plan and the plan of conservation and development. And I think that's a critical role for the NRZ to play. And again, what does the community want to see? Where were we, where are we now, and where else do we need to go to have the continued sustainable transformational impact? And I think that is a critical role that I will always lean on NRZs to play and be a leader in that. And I think that is the direct link to the city and the overarching economic development strategy and plan that we have for the city.
Actually, stole my thunder.
Sorry.
Madam President?
We approved it. So we funded planning.
But I think, as she said, you know, we are coming back on that One City, One Plan report that's back to the state again as we begin to mobilize it. You know, Janice, while I've been to a few of the NRZ meetings, and we'll be at other ones coming up. So one in advance, I thank you for your history, because you know you can't do anything if you don't have a history of what's happened before. But where I think, as we look at this planning process again, what's really going to be important to me is kind of at the neighborhood level, how are we going to benchmark what success looks like, right? We're at a point where we get a lot of stuff happens, but when we go back, we can't define whether or not we had wins or losses. We just, you know, because over time it's like that house that there used to be a vacant lot, and then Habitat or somebody or Carlos puts a house there 2 years ago. 2 years go by, you forget that was a vacant lot, right? So I think it's really important that at the neighborhood level, just like, you know, the Metro Alliance is starting to benchmark and look at data, at a neighborhood level, what my challenge to you is going to be, tell me and define what successes on a neighborhood level look like, so when we come back in 10 years, we know whether or not we've progressed or not, and we can define that and own that. So it's a little different about, you know, we want crime to be down, and we want to make sure that the streetscape was a certain way. Now it's kind of, let's begin to articulate what our success metrics look like at a neighborhood level so that we can incorporate that all the way up to how the city's going to define the success overall.
I just want to piggyback on that because I think you're right on target. And also not waiting 10 years, but those sequential wins, right? And those checkpoints to ensure that we're on target, we're on pace, we're making progress. Where are we falling short? Where do we need to put more effort in? I think that's the diligence and the persistence that needs to happen with respect to measuring our success. And so I'm glad that you see that as a critical function, but I do think we can't wait 10 years to reflect. We have to stay diligently on it.
I think I want to invite the mayor up to close the panel discussion with a summary.
Because I really think, as you heard tonight, the Alliance has really not had its focus on economic development. It's not been focused on competitiveness and on selling the city and on recruiting and retaining businesses. It was much more sort of a public policy organization. They were up, talking about the capital, about things, but they weren't that engine that cities that have succeeded have had, where their business community comes together and says, we're going to compete and we're going to win. And I think we already saw an example of what happens when our business community does engage in that way with emphasis. Because the reason emphasis came is that our CEOs in Hartford, many of whom live outside of Hartford, were willing to make that phone call, emphasis, and say, we do business with you, we want you here in Hartford. So I think there's tremendous power in that, and I'm excited that David is now here and focusing the organization on being that kind of entity. And I hope you heard tonight why I'm so excited about having Erik Johnson as our new development director. He is relentless, he's tireless, but I think he also gets it. He understands. Look, in a lot of ways, New Haven was about 20 years ahead of us in what we're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And not saying we want to do everything the way New Haven did, but I do think we can learn a lot. And we can also learn a lot from other cities. But I'm thrilled that Erik decided to join our team and is pushing forward on a whole lot of fronts all at once. When Sarah and I moved to Hartford in 2006, it felt like Hartford was a little bit on the cusp of something. I don't know if you remember back in 2006, it was the sort of the midst of the Rising Star campaign. It felt like it. And then, within 2 years, it felt like the bottom fell out. Right? And some of that was national economy, but some of it was that we weren't really building on a solid foundation. And it wasn't the first time. We've had, as a city, although I wasn't here, just looking back and talking to a lot of people for a lot of years, we've been at those moments before where it feels like we're at a moment of promise. And then we don't quite convert, and we don't quite make it last. And I think if we're being honest with ourselves, we're at one of those moments right now. Absolutely. And it's up to us whether it's different this time. Yeah. We've got a lot of momentum right now. David talked about some of those, those rankings and measurements that come out. I'll tell you what, it's been a long time since, you could week after week look and see, something ranking Hartford number 7 in tech talent growth, or the list of quote unquote surging cities, top 50 surging cities, and having Hartford on that list. And I don't care at all if they're measuring the whole region. And we should be proud of that and take that as an asset. Look, we've got to bear a lot of the region's burdens. We ought to take the benefit of the region's assets too, and not be shy about it. Right? So I think we're at that moment where we really can change the game. And over the last couple of years, obviously we had to fight crises, right? We had to fight the budget crisis, all that. But what we really focused on the economic development front was just trying to demonstrate that we could execute effectively and get stuff done. There were a lot of projects that are underway that they're not the creation of my administration or our tenure here. They're things that the city had wanted to do for a long time, but just hadn't get done. And whether you're talking about Bowles Park and Westbrook Village, or Weaver High School and starting next year MLK, or the Albany Avenue Streetscape, which sat there for 20 years, or Dillon, or the Colt Armories, doing this next phase, or the incredible stuff that that Carlos and others are doing in Parkville, or taking the buildings like the one at the corner of Trumbull and Pearl. Right, you couldn't get more smack in the middle of our downtown, but it was a pigeon house for 25 years and vacant, and now it's going to be coming back to life. Just doing those, and of course the ballpark, making sure we didn't end up with a hunk of rusting steel. We wanted to just get those things done and demonstrate that we could move forward. Because I think, and this came up too, a big part of whether we're successful is whether we believe that we can be successful. And I believe 100% that we can and will be successful. But we've got to believe that. When we got to embrace the change, and we got to recognize that this is a city with extraordinary assets. And if we're bold and if we're disciplined in executing, you can't just throw Hail Marys all the time. You got to have a good ground game and just keep moving it down the field. But if we're bold about what we want to do, we actually can change the game in a pretty big way. When you go down that list of projects that are happening in the city, hopefully you see, as Erik and Glenn talked about, we really are focused on neighborhood development, on those projects that really you can see and feel make a difference in our neighborhood. Also really focused on blight, at the smaller level. How do we start tackling those blighted properties that are an anchor around, so many of our neighborhoods. And Laura and her team are doing a great work there, and just got a big boost yesterday with a new grant from the Hartford Foundation. But I also think we have to try to get over the divides in our city between neighborhood and neighborhood, and even between neighborhood and downtown. And ultimately, my hope is that in this city of 17 square miles, that everybody in the city thinks of every neighborhood as theirs. That when I talk with folks who lived in Hartford 50 years ago, including some of you in the audience, everybody, no matter where they grew up, no matter where they lived, everybody remembers with nostalgia going down and checking out G Fox. Everybody. And I think ultimately success for our city will be a time when we can all have those kind of shared points of pride once again. When we can all take pride in having both stronger neighborhoods and a vibrant downtown that's not, quiet on weekends and after 5, and I think we're starting to get there. So, for example, about half a dozen of the new businesses that have opened downtown are actually owned by local residents of color. If you think about the new painting studio that's on Pratt Street, you think about Chicken and Waffle Place, you think about, of course, Russell. Russell's been there, but he just opened his new part as well. Think about the very first minority woman-owned medical marijuana place that's opened, really groundbreaking there as well. And you can go on and on. I think we have to try to get over the sense that where something's happening geographically is excluding others. We have to all embrace our entire city. And it goes the other way too. And that's why anytime I'm talking with a suburban audience or one of the Mark Twain Fund or somewhere else, I'm telling everybody there, go explore our neighborhoods. Go out and eat in our neighborhoods. And I think we all have to do that too. But I just want to make that point that I really think ultimately we should take pride in our neighborhoods, and we should be aggressive and relentless about neighborhood economic development. But we've got to get over our divides, because we're too small a city to be divided against one another. Lastly, let me just say, if you look at the growth that's happened over the last year and a half in the innovation ecosystem, in getting our big employers to start to think about Hartford as a place that they want to invest and create jobs. The insurance companies joining together for the first time ever to 5 companies together and launching an InsurTech accelerator with one of the global leaders in that arena. With Stanley Black & Decker has been New Britain Forever deciding to plant a flag in Hartford and move their innovation team. Same thing's about to happen in the digital healthcare with a bunch of the healthcare providers. That has happened, I think, faster than even the most optimistic of us thought possible. And we do have to really make sure that growth is inclusive, that the training in coding and entrepreneurial skills, that allows for pathways for all of our residents, that we're building those partnerships between companies and community colleges so that there's a good training pipeline, for example. We do have to do all that. But ultimately, for a city of our size, if we can be successful in truly taking advantage of the fact that we're halfway between New York and Boston, and people are getting priced out of New York and Boston every day, and we've got an opportunity to position this city as a competitive place, that really will lift all boats ultimately. because when you think back to the time when our boats were all a little bit higher up, it was when, you know, Pratt and Whitney was growing like crazy and they were hiring here, right? We need to make sure that that we're growing as much as possible at every level of our economy, and that means we got to be playing at every level of the growth competition. So I know that was rambling, but I really am excited about where we are. I am wary of the lessons of the past, which, you know, are that we've been at these moments before, and that's why I think we have to be really relentless and deliberate about keeping momentum going month after month, week after week, and so that's what this team is doing. That's what Eric's doing, and that's what we're doing in partnership, you know, with City Council and with the Alliance and many other partners. This is really important because you asked before, or one of the questions was, what can everybody do? And I don't think it was phrased exactly this way, but what can Hartford 2000 do? And I know that Hartford 2000 has been doing a lot of thinking about the future and the role of Hartford 2000, and I don't yet know the results of that, you know, strategic assessment and sort of where you want to focus. But I will say this: as we've battled crisis over the last couple of years and tried to lay a more solid foundation for growth, we have not done as well on basic quality of life issues as we need to. And I will always, I'll try to brag about stuff we do well, and I'll acknowledge where we fall short. And we have not done as well as we could. On some issues, I think we have done. You know, on blight, I think we really are actually making some progress. On ATVs, I think we actually started to make a dent. But on bulky, obviously, we had a misstep, you know, last year. On litter, we've got a long way to go. On reimagining vacant spaces in our neighborhoods that are you know, overgrown or blighted. Those are all things that, you know, Erik can tell you. I've been pushing our team and saying, we've been through the fire over the last couple of years. We have to focus much harder on just the basic operational improvements and the basic things that make our neighborhoods feel livable. But I also know that we cannot do that without partnership from our neighborhoods, and we cannot do that ultimately without our NRZs and without Hartford 2000. So I'm asking you, and I look forward to working very closely as we do this, to be a really strong partner. Don't be afraid to hold our feet to the fire, but let's work together to make sure that we're tackling those quality of life issues, because if we can do all those things, if we can get, you know, our big companies investing in innovation ecosystem here, and we can get some of these development projects done, and we can also make sure, you know, that the intersection around the corner isn't, you know, littered with trash, then we really will have changed the game.